Welcome, Jedi Seeker. Today's bit of path working we're going to be looking at is an often requested advanced technique. That's right, you've all said, when are we going to get into advanced force work? So let me first start with saying that all advanced force work is basic force work, done more efficiently, more intensely, or with a little bit more to it. The force flows in accordance with our focus. You want to make your muscles stronger, you focus on the strength of the muscles. You want to run faster, you focus on the speed and pressure that you can exert. Focus on a feeling of lightness in your step. These are the basics of all force work. Where you put your focus, where you put your intent, so goes your energy. But you all know there's a trick to doing it better. And I know you know there's a trick to doing it better. And part of that trick is the cultivation of the force within yourself. So there is more access available. The first level of force that we have access to at all, and will always have the most access to, is the personal force. This is the force within you. This is you in the force. This is the force of you versus universal flow of the force or things like that, which we are innately constantly drawing upon, a part of, and within. Now, in the grand scheme of things, we are but a spark in the darkness. We are not the whole of the force. While the force is infinite, we are finite, which gives us a lot of room to grow and become better than we were yesterday. The great thing about beings that are limited in this way, while still being eternal within the force, is that we can always become better and more. There is no stagnation. There's only growth. And because of that, we have opportunities. So without further ado on this, without any further preamble, let's talk about what I'm calling the three reservoirs. Now, the terminology on this will change a bit as the Seekers become a little bit more foundationally structured in the Jedi Seeker groups, and within Jedi Pathworking as a subset of that, I just use the terms that I'm most familiar with. Now, when I say the three reservoirs, the first thing a lot of you with a martial background are going to think, he's going to talk about the three Dantians. And I am. But I'm going to talk about these as reservoirs because the concept of the Dantians has a lot of different views and opinions, and these core three areas also overlap the largest points of energy pooling for things like chakras and in meridian systems and energy body systems. So when I call them reservoirs, it prevents me from kind of just favoring Chinese mysticism in this, in an area where Chinese mysticism has as much debate and variations as any other mystical system. So with these three reservoirs, you have the lower reservoir, which be around where your belly button is, a little lower and inward from within that. You have your middle reservoir, which would be around chest level to solar plexus level, that generalized area. And then you have the upper reservoir, which would be the upper chest, throat, neck, head, and expanding. Now, the lower reservoir encompasses below this. So think of these points that I'm pointing out as like the center point, and think of large circles, large spheres that can hold quite a bit of essence of the force, the life essence aspect of the force. So within these, we are constantly filling up the lower reservoir. And I would say, despite what some philosophers and spiritualists in Chinese mysticism would say, I would say we are also filling up the middle and upper a little bit more frequently than a lot of people would like to hear. And the reason I say this is because we instinctively draw in and refine some of the force in the lower into the upper areas, and because of this, that is why health is affected as it is, where if you have a problem in the lower areas, it really does spread quickly to the upper areas so efficiently, or inefficiently if you prefer, whereas if you are cultivating a strong core, energy flows outward from that. It's something we learn in muscle energy work, martial arts, lifting, moving. A good core is a good everything. A good foundation is a good everything, you'll hear people say as well. So, within this, the first of these things, I want to look at these as concepts, and then we're going to look at application of these concepts. So the first concept of how to cultivate the energy in these reservoirs is going to be filling up from the bottom to the top. So the focus on this is going to be drawing in the force so that it fills up from the very bottom and essence of the self to the top. You'll note I'm not hitting on a complete technique at this moment, and there's a reason for this. And bear with me, you're going to learn more from me, not just handing you a pre-built meditation than you may have learned in your entire life before this, in some instances. So we fill up from the bottom all the way to the top. You're going to note when you start to move past one reservoir to another, sometimes it feels like there's a kind of gate. It takes longer to fill up. It takes more pressure, more effort to fill up past a certain point. That's okay. The next concept is compression. This starts at the lower reservoir. And the idea is to compress the energy there so there is more and more room until when that overflowing occurs, it is able to transfer next to the center, and we compress there till we can take in no more, and then to the upper. With compression, you want to be very good at filling up from bottom to top, very experienced with that first. Otherwise, compression puts a strain on the system. So don't dive into compression unless you've been doing some form of energy cultivation before that. The next concept in this that I want to hit on is the idea of continual flow. This is where the reservoirs are acting almost like a pipeline system in which you pull energy in and it constantly moves through the lower, into the middle, up through the upper, and then out, back into the flow of all things. This concept of continual flow is a good way of drawing in and keeping a clean, constant, consistent flow of those other energies, those universal force energies that you're going to be drawing in, the universal flow of the force into the self. So where the other two cultivations before this are about having a reserve that you can draw on initially, this is about training yourself to be able to draw into that reserve point in a flow-like pattern. So when you empty the gas tank, it's not truly ever empty. After continual flow, the next concept is alternating flows. It's where you can draw in and push out at the same time. This is very difficult for a lot of people, and this is why we're getting into concept first. If I get into the application first, I can only cover one of these, and all of these use the same applications, just a different focus. So, in knowing that this is very difficult, you might find that where the applications of breathing or movement worked very well for compression and continual flow and the filling up method, you might need to work with something else, such as using imagery more for the alternating flows. We'll get into that in a minute. We're almost there, folks. Don't worry. This is not going to be a super long episode. So, the next thing to look at is going to be purification. This is the next concept. This is focusing more on pushing out stagnant or chaotic energy. So what you would do is, this is the idea of pulling into those reservoirs and isolating those negative energies and then pushing them out with greater emphasis. Lastly is balancing internal energies within this. And for this, you need to use some concept of elements. And when I say elements, I mean in the classic sense, component parts. If you find that you use a Western system, you can balance this as concepts of earth, water, air, and fire. If you find that you use an Eastern Chinese concept, then you're going to be looking at earth, metal, wood, fire, and water. If you find that you do not wish to use either of those, then what you can focus on is yin and yang, or light and dark as concepts within push and pull, if you prefer. And why, when I say light and dark, why would you be balancing that? This is more balancing the essences of the self, as in the light of consciousness versus the dark of subconsciousness. Not good and evil. That's getting into Ashla and Abogan, which is harmony and disruption. You're not going to bring harmony, more harmony to harmony, and you're not going to bring harmony to disruption and still be balancing it there without getting rid of it. That's antithetical to what we're talking about. So if you're not using another elemental system where you have 4, 5, 6, 24, 172, I don't care, elements, you can balance out the concepts of active and passive energies in the self. And that's perfectly acceptable to use for that. So you can use a 2 elemental system. See that? Some people would have told you you got to use a 50 elemental system made this complex. I'm going to tell you, yeah, no, you can use 2. That's fine. So those are the conceptualized concepts of working with the reservoirs. So now, what are the applications? Well, the applications are things like breathing exercises. So when you're filling up with breathing exercises, you're going to focus on drawing in and holding that breath for a little bit, and then pushing out, and then holding that for a little bit too. Now, I'm not going to use a specific count. And the reason for this is because people don't count honestly. It's very hard to count these things properly, and everybody has a different count. Some people count fast, and they're like, oh, I do 5, 2, 5, 2. And that's great, but if you're not exhaling as much as you need to, and your exhale is just pacing different from your inhale, and you're holding, but you're counting faster on your hold, and it's actually a 5, 1, 5, 1, then I've done nothing by telling you to count. You can use the counting methods if you feel you need to pace yourself, if you don't feel like you're giving enough time to the hold and enough time to the out or the in. But that's academic and that's specific systems. For the purpose of just filling up, the idea is you draw in, you keep the positive, useful energy, you keep the force that is the living force within, and then you release that which is the essence of the force, which has it within it the concept of decay. You're letting that flow out while cultivating and storing that positive force. Now, you're going to say, well, that sounds like continual flow or purification. All of these things share some commonalities. So after looking at the concept of filling up, you want to fill up at the lower reservoir all the way first. So fill up with that air. And eventually, as you're doing this, as you're feeling the energy, you're going to feel it filling you up and then filling up in the chest area. That's the second reservoir. And then over in the head, throat, and above, you'll feel like a sphere forming there. This is as you fill up one step at a time. It's okay to only be able to feel that filling up in the lower sphere. If you feel that for weeks and months and maybe even years, that simply means you have a vast reserve at the lower sphere. You are one of those people that can store quite a bit there. Maybe you'll need to do the exercise more often, or maybe you will have to focus on the feeling of the force and the flow being more intense. You have to up that feeling, up that expectation to a higher intensity to fill up quicker. You'll have to piece that out as you go. Everybody's a little different. The idea is you gently fill up from one to the other until all of them are full. That then cultivates an internal reserve. With compression, we're doing almost the same thing in a breathing exercise. With compression, the idea is that we are then compressing, pushing in to make the energy more dense and then filling up around it and pushing in until we cannot do that anymore. And then you should naturally feel a very easy progression to the next sphere. I'm not going to say much more on that because it's self-explanatory. You want to do the filling up a lot more because with the compression, if you think about the idea of this compression and see it as a kind of air being compressed, this could be really bad, really quick at some point if you were to compress too quickly and hurt yourself. So you want to go slow with this. You want to master filling up bottom to top to where this is very easy, where you can do this very quickly before you start using compression. And then it is always better if you start to feel pain or discomfort to stop. Take some time and do something else. There is no rush. Getting there broken is not better than getting there. So not getting there broken, but being like, I did my best, is not doing your best. Doing your best is getting wherever you get to. I'll make that really clear. Continual flow. With the breathing, this is just a steady, continual breathing. Deep, slow breaths in, deep, slow breaths out. There is no pause. You are not working on filling up. You are working on this current that moves inward and outward. Alternating flows. You can do this through breathing. It is very difficult. I have not mastered doing this where I can breathe in through one nasal passage and out through the other. Some people can. I'm not recommending that. What I'm going to say is for alternating flows, this is where using a breathing exercise and one of the other exercises such as movement, visualization, audialization, foods, herbs, teas, images. These are where this comes in handy because you can pair off two focuses, one to handle the pulling in and one to handle pushing out. And what you do is you alternate at each point. So within the breathing exercises, we'll move to movement exercises, and we'll go back and hit some of that right now. Actually, you know what? It's better to do it right now. So we're going to stop at alternating flows. We go back to movement exercises, filling up. You're using movements that draw in with your hands. You draw in with your limbs and your extremities to the center. You allow that to be the visualization. You can combine this with breathing when it comes to the filling up. When it comes to compression, you focus on holding a posture at those points, representing that compressed flow. So a lot of people do the cupped palms facing each other. For the continual flow, you do the movements so they are continual, steady, slow flow. So now we have breathing and movement exercises up to alternating flows. At this point, what you would be doing is when you breathe in, you are pushing out. When you breathe out, you are pulling in with your hands. So you breathe in, you push out with your hands, you push out with your limbs, you push out with your body. When you are breathing out, you pull in to those reservoirs, to those points of focus. You could do this also with visualization of the energy in motion. Now we're going to move to purification. We're going to look at both breathing and movement exercises with purification. With purification, I have found the best method is to focus more on the exhale and pushing with emphasis the negative energies out during the purification. With the movement, I have found that it is best to push with a hard push with the muscles. So this goes from being very flowing to a little bit more aggressive in your movement with your muscles. You do not need to stress to the point where you're at risk of damaging a muscle. That's not the point in this. But there is a vast difference from a very subtle push and a very hard, muscular push with the limbs. So within this, with the purification, the idea is you are pushing that stagnant or chaotic energy that wants to hang on and is not leaving normally out. You can do this, again, by focusing on that exit breath, for focusing on the negative being carried out, or with hard movements. So what about balancing internal energies? When you're balancing with those with breathing, you're going to have to assign a breathing pattern that takes into account those elements. So you will have to find a pattern that works well with the type of element you're working for. A general rule is that fire is fast. So you're looking at shorter inhales and exhales and less held period, if any held period at all. You want to make sure not to hyperventilate. There is a breathing exercise called fire breathing, where you breathe in very quickly through the nose and then out through the mouth. This would be a good example of a fire type breathing. For something like water, you're going to want slow, steady flow. For something like air, this is just going to be more of a focused breath. A casual, focused breathing, more or less like you would normally breathe, but focusing on the act of breathing. And for earth, you would have that strong hold period in between each. Now, I said before that you can go with a 2-elemental system. And for a 2-elemental system, that's even easier with breathing. You just focus on one as a steady flow, and then the other as the holding pattern while you're focusing on this, balancing these. And the way to balance them would be then to make sure that you're using the same amount of time for each. Notice that the focus on the exercise and what you're focusing on is what's promoting it. There has to be some link that is reasonable and rational for your mind to bridge the gap. But the focus is what's doing this. With movement exercises, you're going to develop postures. For the concept of light or passive, or rather light or active energies, you're going to use postures that are more expansive. For the dark or passive energies, the pulling in ones, you're going to use postures that tighten and compress the muscles. They tighten the body. By balancing each movement to the other, you are now, as you are focusing on the 3 reservoirs, promoting that balanced energy internally. Visualization is probably the easy one for a lot of people, and it works really well with all of these. You are visualizing the energy, filling from the bottom to the top, compressing, acting as a continual flow, alternating 2 flows in and out. Visualization is the easiest one to use alone for that. You're visualizing a purifying energy coming into your body, carrying out the negative. You are visualizing those elemental energies balancing internally. Again, visualization is really good for the balancings. Audialization. This is the feeling of sound. This is using sound mentally. For all of these, guided meditations could work as this. For all of these, you can also focus on a tone or a pitch, a concept of a sound. So you focus on an idea of a very steady, simple sound becoming denser and denser. You can do this also through humming. You can start with a higher pitched and then lower yourself down as you're compressing energy to a and what this is, you're using your ability to generate sound to represent this. So you can do that also with the same type of expression for filling up. You can use the concept of sound as a continual flow by focusing on the essence of a steady background hum. You can also use mantras for things like this. For alternating flows, this gets back into that, can you make 2 sounds at one time? And actually, yeah, you can for most people. If you have the ability to clap, you can use that as you're drawing in, so clapping towards the center of the lower reservoir while you are expressing outward with a sound, or centering so that you cup the hands in a cupping sound. See if my microphone picks this up well enough. So it's not quite a clap while you are pushing out with a higher pitched. So to demonstrate audially. Very simple. Very easy to do. If you have only one hand, you can improvise and clap somewhere else or stomp. Stomping is still a sound. What you're doing is you're using some sensory association to move this energy. For purification, a steady hum, as is often done with things like the Om. You pick a pitch that feels like it has good resonance with you, and you let that break up, and you feel the stagnation lifting. For balancing, you can assign tones to each element. Everybody's going to feel a little different about what tones represent what, so I'm not going to give a definitive. Just going to say for me, fire is higher pitched, earth is lower pitched, and everything else falls in between. So, we've covered all of these methods that you can do. We've made a lot of use of your body and your mind for this. But that's not the only way to do this. Choosing foods that are very associated with certain concepts can be helpful. Now, I'm not going to recommend a dietary lifestyle for anyone. What I am going to say is that it doesn't take a lot of research to find which foods or spices are associated with which elemental properties. And from that, you can make this very useful for things like purification, the balancing. For filling up, it's making sure that you're bringing in food that is useful to building energy. For the compression, it really doesn't help that much with foods per se. There's not many ways to do that with foods that I know of except to eat very dense, nutritious foods. And even then, it's only helping so much. You're going to need to use one of the other methods. For alternating flows, that's outside the scope of what you can do with eating food. But we've covered most of the rest pretty easily with that. So having an awareness of what you're eating can be useful there. Herbs. Now this is where we do get into herbal teas and the use of herbs in cooking, as we said before, but herbal tea specifically. This is where, or herbal fragrances as well. This is where we get into using this as an augment to the other practices. Spicy teas generate very hot energy, very life, very active energy. Life is a hot thing. It generates heat, generates energy. So, looking for teas with cinnamon, things like chai tea, things with allspice. If you have allergies, avoid your allergies, obviously. This can be very helpful for filling up with that energy as an extra added to. Many practices say that hot liquids are also very good for filling up with that life energy aspect. For the compression, we're in the same spot we were with before. Same with flow. Same with alternating flows almost. You can drink alternating teas. so that you drink a tea that is more of a purifier, a calmer, such as chamomile, after drinking a tea such as hot chai or spiced chai. You can also take a cup of either and alternate in between them and focus on the energy as you're taking it in and what it represents. Imagery. Right now, they're going to be, you already said visualization. No, what I mean is using external imagery. This could be symbols or seals. This could be a video of the way the energy moves up and down the energetic lines in the body. By using something like this, you can have a focal point for an eyes open based meditation, either for the filling up, for the compression, continual flow, the alternating flows, purification, or balancing. All imagery that you can put your focus on and let yourself kind of fall into a pseudo trance state while you're doing this can be used to guide the other methods or used on its own to some lesser degree. Finally, we have the Jedi Code. Other mantras can work as well, but by focusing on the code while you are focusing on filling up from the bottom to the top, from the lower reservoir to the top, while focusing on compression, while focusing on continual flow, while focusing on alternating flows, while focusing on purification, while focusing on balancing energies. The Jedi Code focuses on the essence of the Force as it is. It focuses on the divisions of things to allow the separations. You're trying to cultivate life energy, life force inside yourself, expel the chaotic, the more death-oriented energies that you collect and hold on to. You're getting rid of the dark energies that come from being alive, those negative forces that accumulate in the body, and bringing in the life force from the greater flow of the Force itself. So by using the code, the mantra form, that's there is no emotion, there is peace, there is no ignorance, there is knowledge, there is no passion, there is serenity, there is no chaos, there is harmony, there is no death, there's the Force. By focusing on this in any of these exercises, focusing on the feeling, the kinesthetic feel of these, allows you to use the mantra to move these energies. And you'll notice I said the kinesthetic, and I haven't spoken on the kinesthetic so far. And the reason for this is because you can do all of these kinesthetically. That's more of a physical visualization, so feeling it in the body. For most people who can do that naturally and easily, everything I have just said you don't need to worry about. You're already probably doing it pretty good. Not everyone can do this, and even the people that can benefit from a little extra help in other ways, other focal points. A lot of people, over time, reach a state where they simply feel the Force. And they direct that feeling, and they set their mind on these focuses, and so it happens. They don't need to do deep breathing. They don't need to do the movement. Movement's still good. Movement keeps you alive, but, it doesn't need to be a focus for that session. Getting to that point, if you are not naturally inclined to kinesthetic focus, which we have focused on somewhat in previous exercises and audio essays, if you will, getting to that point, if you are not able to conceptualize that, might not be possible. So I'm focusing on the other options at this phase. But if you can kinesthetically do this already, using everything you've just learned here will amplify what you're doing. It will make it easier to do, and it will let you focus with more intensity. For the kinesthetics out there, if you're able to already do alternating flows easily, where you feel the pulling out and pushing in, or pulling in and pushing out at the same time, fantastic. You're already well on your way. If you can't, then I just gave you your challenge for the week. Ultimately, most people's goal is to get to that kinesthetic point. Not everyone can, not everyone will, and no one has to. It's not a necessity for force work. It is an advanced way to do it because it is direct will to feel. But we've got to recognize that not all Jedi are going to feel, work with, and use the Force in the same way. So I wanted this to be something where no matter where you're at, you get something out of it. And that's all that I can give you on storing and working with personal Force in this way. Thank you for your time. May the Force guide and protect you. And remember, training never stops.